Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So we're looking at part 20 of examining TurretinFan's response to Revelation 16:5. So we're examining his part 17 of question mark. And so at the moment, he's going through the Ethiopic and looking at the Ethiopic and the claims that I've made about the Ethiopic and putting out some claims of his own. And so we're going to examine this and go through it. Now, last time, I think I'd done about 3.5 hours and I was getting a little bit tired. And so I started going through the Ethiopic section and sort of realized that it was sort of a bit of a waste of time because I was going to be pulling the pin on it halfway through somewhere. So I thought, well, I'm better off going through sort of from the beginning. And so we're going to be going through, certain other things that he's saying about the Bishop's Bible and Beza and things like that. But let's just continue on. This is part 20. If you don't know what this is about, I've written a book about Revelation 16:5, defending the Textus Receptus and the King James reading of Shalt Be. And TurretinFan is reading through that and critiquing that. And sometimes it's constructive criticism. Sometimes it's criticism that I think is unwarranted. But either way, he is giving his point of view. And so I'm glad for that. And we're just going through this at the moment. So let's just start off with TurretinFan. So we're at about the 13-minute mark on his number 17 response video.
Omicron, there's another Omicron Sigma. You can see how this is sort of remotely somewhat similar between these two words, and you could kind of imagine a corruption of one into the other somehow happening over the years. So is Beza right? Now, Beza may or may not have this idea in his mind. I don't think that Nick is saying it's just a corruption of sight or sound or anything like that, but anyway, is this substitution, esomenos for osios, is that correct? And let's turn to the Ethiopic to figure that out. But first, here's a little bit of background on the reception or not of Beza's emendation. So around 1611, the King James Version translators edited the Bishop's Bible at Revelation 16:5. That's what their task was. They were going through the Bishop's Bible and editing it. They weren't doing a scratch translation of the New Testament. They were editing the Bishop's Bible. And they were experts. So they started with something good and were trying to make something even better, which is what we should be doing as well. When we see the King James Version, which is excellent, we can make it even better. That's why
you have to have the skills and the ability to make it even better. And the thing is, they were making it better because the underlying Greek text of Theodore Beza had become better. We haven't seen the underlying Greek text get better. What we've seen is a degradation of the Greek text, and we've seen an absolute perversion of the text. And so that's why which text are you going to change it to? Even TurretinFan doesn't know which text he follows. Because here he's like, well, I go with the Osios reading, and many times he's following a majority text argumentation, but he won't follow the majority text argumentation for everywhere because he follows the critical text. And so he's not really sure. So he'll make claims, the original says this because the vast majority of manuscripts say this. But at the end of the day, he doesn't go with the vast majority of manuscripts most of the time with the critical text. And so when I say most of the time, with the readings that are the important ones that we're looking at. And so
I have in the opening credits, or whatever you call it, the opening trailer of the episode, can we improve the King James Version? Because that's what we should be aiming for, not trying to tear it down, but trying to improve it, make it better. So what about the Bishop's Bible 1568? You can see here it says, "And I heard the angel of the waters say, Lord, which art and wast, thou art righteous, and that Holy One, because thou hast given such judgments." So that corresponds to this Greek with, not with Oesomenos, but this one with Osios, because you can see that Holy One is Hosios, that Holy One. Now, it does have the chi, the and you can see it says, and that Holy One. So the chi is there as well. But that's not the substitution issue that Beza was focused on, whether or not the Chi was there. I'm just mentioning that out because it turns out to be important later on. Even in the 1599 Geneva Bible, printed after Beza's emendation of the Greek, the Geneva Bible continued to follow the original Greek. Here they have...
Well, they didn't do an update of the Geneva Bible. It was the Geneva Bible notes that were updated. And so basically the Geneva Bible was stable all the way through from 1560 all the way through till their last printings. And so what they did change was at times they had, I think it was Bullinger's notes, they had other people's notes. Sometimes they put Theodore Beza's notes on there. But you'll still have the same readings. 1599 is basically reading the 1560 reading. So to go, well, this is afterwards, well, it's not actually like an amended text, or else it would be called a new version. Yeah, they weren't in the habit of just sort of going, okay, this is called the Bishop's Bible. Let's just change little bits here and there. And no, that they go, okay, well, no, this is the King James version. We've used the Bishop's Bible as a draft. We're looking at everything, and we're amending the text where it needs amending, but we're not just going to call it, Bishop's Bible, and so people could get confused. So the Geneva Bible 1599 is exactly the same as 1560. So regardless of when it was printed, whether it was printed after Beza came to this revelation and understanding about the Nomina Sacra issue or not, it doesn't matter.
Thou art just, which art and wast, and holy. So, and holy is, again, the translation of Hosias, not Hosomenos. And you can even see the notes. You can see it better on the website. But anyway, the notes also don't even mention this issue or address it. The Elsevier printers?
I'm pretty sure the notes of Theodore Beza actually, they don't mention the Annotationis, because that was reserved for scholarship, because what they're doing nowadays is that disagreements between scholars, they're putting that in marginal notes of Bibles. So your average person reading the Bible goes, oh no, those verses aren't supposed to be in there, and they lose their faith in the Bible, and they don't trust the Word of God anymore. And, instead of it just being something discussed between scholars. And so, yes, if it's, some verse that's been completely missing or whatever, like say in the Geneva Bible or Bishop's Bible, the King James might have mentioned in the margin, well, this was missing in some of the manuscripts or whatever, to let people know. It's not like it's a print error or whatever. Yes, this was not around, in Erasmus's editions or whatever, or Stephanus perhaps. But they didn't talk about major text issues in their commentary. They talked about faith issues, trying to build people's faith up. Because, see, what you find is most of the people in the academy are not Christian. So they're not trying to build up people's faith. They're trying to give them information. It's like, well, this manuscript here says this. And that's why James White will say, oh, it's just a science. It's a neutral science, where I don't find that at all. I find it's quite biased and it's quite contradictory. Many times they'll use one sort of methodology for one verse to throw it in the bin, and they'll use another methodology for another verse with exactly the same amount of information, exactly the same type of principles, or exactly the same attestation, I should say, and they throw it out. This is where James White, he goes with the reading of only begotten God at 1 Timothy 3:16, because of what Dean Burgon said. But there were many other things that Dean Burgon said which were of even greater attestation in manuscripts, but James White doesn't go with it. So why does he just go with that one? It was just strange. It's like, well, it's a bit like saying, well, okay, there's the majority of manuscripts, there's this reason, there's that reason. Or why aren't you looking where there's even more manuscripts and more reasons? But we just see these glaring inconsistencies.
A family of printers descending from Ludwig, I think that's the right way to say it, Elsevier, reverted to the Greek original from Beza's reading in the 1624, but then returned to Beza's reading in the 1633. Now, I know Nick has some discussion of why this happened.
Well, basically, the 1624 and the 1633 were done by the same person. The other editions after that were basically just rehashes of previous editions. And so that's why most people just go with the 1624 and the 1633. They're not saying, okay, let's go to the 1658 edition and look at that Textus Receptus. And the issue was 1624 basically followed Stephanus. The 1633, it clearly has Beza's reading of Somenos there. So they adopted that reading.
Happened, but nevertheless, in 1641, they returned back again to the Greek original. By Greek original, I do mean...
Notice it's like, they turned back again. So this is the type of reasoning that I pulled Stephen Boyce up for, because he was saying there was a 1611 edition of Theodore Beza's text. So this Theodore Beza died in 1605. So a 1611 edition, he made up this story that even his printers didn't think that the reading was good, so they reprinted another edition to get rid of that horrible reading, and the 1611 edition of Beza, and so not understanding that there's only been 5 editions of Beza. There are many different types of printings, octavo editions, folio editions, etc. There's only been 5 editions, and 4 of them are in Greek. One of them is in Latin. So 4 of them have a Greek text accompanying it. The first one is basically the Latin text with a Latin commentary about the underlying Greek words. And so, but that's called his first edition. And so his 5th edition was in 1598. Okay. So I proved to Stephen Boyce that the 1611 edition of the text of Beza was the 1565 edition, a reprint of it. Exactly like I showed pictures, verbatim, exactly the same commentary, same everything. They might have fixed a few typos here and there, but it was like it's exactly the same. And he just didn't want to hear it, and never really acknowledged it. I proved him wrong on it, and he was just like, "Well, you're a stalker." So okay, whatever.
Hosius, whether or not the Chi should be original or not is not my point. But the point is, Hosius, as opposed to Somenos, it was in Beza's 1582. I think it was also in his 1598. Then it was dropped by the Elseviers in 1624, returned in 1630.
You notice it was dropped by the Elseviers in 1624. No, the Elseviers in 1624 based their text on Stephanus. So it's not like they were continuing on. Just because they're labeled Textus Receptus editions doesn't mean there's this cohesive stream of, passing on the baton from one to another. These guys are just printing a New Testament. They printed the 1624. And you look at the London Polyglot, they used Stephanus' 1550 text, 1551 with the numbers in it. And it's like, why they did that. I'm like, well, why wouldn't they use Beza's text? Because that was the better text. So that was the one the King James translators went with. And the Dutch Statenvertaling is pretty much based on that text. But they went with Stephanus. And so I'm not sure why, popularity perhaps or whatever. But for whatever reason, they went with it. And so for whatever reason, the Elseviers went with it, but then they changed. So it's not like they had gone back to like, oh, well, we don't accept Beza's readings. And perhaps there was some sort of copyright issue. I'm not really sure. But in 1633, they were going with Beza's readings here anyway.
33. And then in 1641, and all the subsequent editions that I could find, and I'm not sure, maybe there's some edition I haven't found yet that's different, but the 1640.
So what you see is these are all pretty much identical, because they're just printings of it. They're not separate editions. So
1654, 1658 Lear's printings, they have the same Greek original Hosius, as you can see on the screen. Likewise, if you dig into the Walton's Polyglot, 1657, Bishop Fell's text, 1675, John Mill's text, Wetstein's text, all these texts, they all have the Hosius, the exception being Scrivener's 18.
Okay, so these other ones followed the 1550. So it's pretty plain. It's not like a great mystery or anything. They followed the 1550. And so Walton's Polyglot did that. Scrivener, he was looking for the underlying Greek text. And so
1894 Textus Receptus, but that's not because Scrivener thought that the original should be Hosius, but just that he was trying to provide the Greek corresponding to the King James Version, and the King James Version has followed Beza by putting shall be instead of and the Holy One. So we could go on. The point's straightforward. New Testament textual scholars after Beza generally were not persuaded as to this change, and the only reason for the inclusion of
that's actually wrong. Okay, so I'll go to New Testament conjectures. Let's have a look at Jan Kranz's page. So if we type in Revelation 16:5, what you'll see, it's not that they're rejecting his text. They're actually just going with an earlier form of the text for whatever reason. So say if we have, here, Theodore Beza, pretty sure we can click on a few more things and they'll come up. Yeah, here we go. So notice that Kranz here, so he's talking about, this is the Revelation 16:5, the NA28 has Hosios, the conjecture is Hosomenos, Theodorus Beza, Beza Annotationis in his 1582, and it has 3 here, page 465. So that's the edition, the 1582 edition, the first one that it appeared in, and it's a substitution of Asomenos for Osios. Okay, so we can read his comments there. We've done that before, and we can look at the citation and how it's translated by Jan Kranz in 2019. So I've got that on my website. But if we look down here, so we see the first is Beza. Then we see Henricus Stephanus. So this is the son of Robert Stephanus. He amended his Greek New Testament. And, oops. Okay, so that was the wrong button to press. So it was in his 1587. And it says he simply adopts the reading. There's no annotation. Okay, so then we go to the King James, and so what we have here is it's pro, it's for it. Okay, so Henry Stephanus was for the change. When it says anonymous, well, that's because it's a group of people. So all the translators were for this. There was no footnote. There was no reason for people to doubt this, and so we see it's a pro. Shall be reflects Beza's conjecture. There is no marginal reading. And we see the citation there. And then we see Piscator in 1513. We see Piscator, no, it clearly depends on Beza's annotation, although the latter is not referred to. And then he's got the citation there. So I've got that on my website as well. Then we see Parius in Apocalypsin in 1518. He has a pro. So when it says pro, it means it's for the reading of Theodore Beza. Okay. So then we see anonymous in the States translation. So that would be the Dutch Statenvertaling. So that has the reading as well. So it's a pro. So it's 1537. Then we see Schmidius in Versio, Erasmus Schmidius in 1565. He has also a pro. So he's saying that yeah. Oh, there we have Smidius's footnotes, and so he's saying Jehovah Nomum Periphrasty. I might actually put that one. I think I've got it on my website, but I might actually put that one just into a Google Translate just to get a bit of a taste of what these guys are saying back then. So let's go to Translate. Throw it in there. So this will be rough, but these words, kaihosomenos, enclosed in 3 signs, are not read in all the codes or codices, but they were restored by Beza from an ancient manuscript of good faith. And it seems this restoration necessary since John used to add the third hoekomenos to all other places where he circumscribes Jehovah's name periphrastically. This is exactly what my book is about. It's not like a big mystery. It's just common knowledge to these scholars back in the Reformation era, okay, who were pro-Beza, pro-Reformation scholarship. There's no reason why it should have been omitted here. There's no reason why Jehovah's name wouldn't be expanded here. But the reason why it's not written here, ho ekomenos, as was done in the 4 times above, namely the Apocalypse, those familiar places. But as somenos, it seems to Beza, because Christ is spoken as the coming judge. In the true vision, he is presented already sitting on the tribunal and exercising judgment. Okay, so we can see very similar to Beza's note there. So, so then we see in Marcius, he talks about it too. So he's got a pro. He's for it. And so then we see this guy turns up in 1705, so 100 years after Beza's dead, Pelagius. And so he thinks all manuscripts consulted by Stephanus had Kai Ozios, which is probably correct, but cannot be deduced from the absence of variant readings in the margin of the 1550 edition, and prefers this reading. So he's saying, well, I don't think they had a manuscript, and so then it just sort of starts this contra thing. People just saying, well, we think Beza, I guess he's just lying. It's like 100 years later. No one in Beza's generation was saying this. It's a bit like, King James is a homosexual. And it's like, well, who said that? It's like, someone after he was dead. It's like, a guy who has 8 kids usually isn't a homosexual. Okay, so then we see these other mentions, Wetstein, Piscator, Bengal, and so these are all contras. So then we have a pro, Hoosh, status denial. He's opposed to the reading, but points out against, he says Beza's reference from manuscript. And so, yeah, clearly, when I'll rewind what TurretinFan's said, but you've got Beza saying this, and you've got pro. And the first sort of contra that I'm not saying he is the first contra, but the way that TurretinFan is saying that these people, like, the Elzevirs and others are against it, is because they used a different Greek text. But the issue isn't so much about using Beza's or Stephanus's, because some people were just familiar with using Stephanus's Greek text, so they used it. Walton's polyglot used it, and a lot of people even today just go, well, who was his name? Doug Wilson. It's like, that's the Textus Receptus. It's like, for me, that's sort of, it's not there are different editions of the Textus Receptus, but it's like, to me, following that text is following a text that has clear errors in it that usually TR King James people come against. So that's why I don't follow that text. But some people, I guess, don't know about those issues, or other scholars are just like, well, that's just a base text. And so when he goes on and talks about the mill text, the 1707, it's just a Stephanus text, that's all. It's not like Mill went, oh, I'm going to create my own Greek text. He just went, Stephanus, okay, put it there. Now let's do a collation of other manuscripts compared to this text. That's exactly what Walton did. It just became the standard text to compare with. But the standard text that was accepted by the church was the underlying Greek text of the King James Version, because the King James Version was the one that became popular. The King James Version was the one that was that carried those received readings and was its own form of the Textus Receptus, howbeit just in English. It didn't have a parallel Greek running along with it. But Scrivener attempted to do that 250 years later and did a pretty good job. But there's a few little issues here and there. But at the end of the day, regardless of whether it's printed in a Greek language or an English language, the 1611 has all the words of God there between two covers. So that's why we follow those readings.
This reading in today's Textus Receptus edition, the blue Textus Receptus that you can buy, is because it happens to be the Greek text that corresponds to the 1611 King James Version, not because the Reformed churches received this text for a lengthy time. That said,
but they did.
Dutch 1637 did adopt that reading, and many English editions followed the King James Version. Also, translations were made from the King James Version, which followed the King James Version. And there were some other language versions, like the Spanish Valera 1602, which I think did follow this, and the Oosterwald French version, 1744, that followed it. There are some others as well, I believe. And I haven't carefully studied in each case to see if any of those have textual notes or something like that. Maybe if someone's interested, they can dig into that further. The point, though, is whether or not it deserves the title Textus Receptus for this particular reading, since it wasn't very well received compared to most.
It wasn't very well received. So the King James translators, I mean, you're looking at in Europe at that time, and even today, even secular scholars go, this is probably the greatest congress of scholarship ever to do such a work, like to do a group work like this. Like when you're looking at Bible translations today, when you've got people like Bart Ehrman admitting that he can't read Greek, that he fumbles through a Greek dictionary, and just these guys were speaking Latin, Greek, Hebrew, many times preaching in Latin. Their whole services were in Latin, and many times, like say Stephen Boyce, 30,000 pages of a Greek personal notes, personal diary, all written in Greek. Who does that? 30,000 pages. These guys were, he completed the complete works of Chrysostom. These were exceptional scholars of their day. And so you've got all of them accepting the reading. So you can't just go, okay, on number one, the Elzevirs, one edition, they didn't accept it. But then you've got 60 of the greatest scholars in Europe accepting it. That outweighs, the father's son, the uncle and nephew team of the Elzevirs with the scholars that they used. That outweighs that. So the thing is, people just are counting numbers. It's like, well, this guy accepted it, this guy didn't accept it. Do you know who Piscator was? Do you know that having him accept your reading is like having Einstein accept your scientific paper? You can't just go, well, Bill Nye, the science guy, accepts, this or rejects this or whatever, but Einstein has this one, so it's one against one. It's like, no, one has weight, the other one doesn't. And so you've got to take all that into consideration as well, that it's not just, the authorized version, and Dutch Statenvertaling, no, there's scholarship behind these that number into the hundreds when you get right behind it. And so even Theodore Beza's team, it's not just one guy, Theodore Beza. He had a whole team. Erasmus had a whole team of scholars. Henry Stephanus, his son, had a whole team of scholars. And so it's just because they have the one name in the front, it doesn't mean that it's just them. And so that's why I mentioned people like Jenius and Tremellius and other people behind the scenes who were doing a lot of this type of work, a lot of cross-referencing work, who were contemporary with Beza, and Beza was contemporary with a lot of the King James translators as well. And so it wasn't just like that, you know, they were on completely different teams in a sense. So I don't see why. I know this is a type of strategy that Stephen Boyce used. He was like, "Oh, the Textus Receptus was only sort of accepted for about 30 years. After that, it fizzed out." And it's like, no, this reading, Beza, he brought it forward. It was accepted by scholarship at the time. Like when we say scholarship, talking about people like Lancelot Andrews, Stephen Boyce, Piscator, even if Janius and Tremellis didn't work with Theodore Beza, they accepted the reading. So to me, that's huge. I mean, if you don't understand who Janius and Tremellis are, you just sort of like almost illiterate when it comes to the who's who of the Reformation. That these guys were top-notch Oriental scholars of the day. And so, you know, Tremellius did the Syriac Bible. The guys who did the Ethiopic Bible did the first Syriac Bible. So there is a connection there. And so that's one of the things I go into in the book. But let's just continue. So anyway, I would say I'm not sure why people try to downgrade that. I know on a cursory look, when you go through and you're like, oh, well, the Geneva Bible, 1599, doesn't have the reading. Well, I guess they didn't accept it. It's like, no, they're actually printing an older edition of the Geneva Bible. And it was Theodore Beza doing that. I mean, Theodore Beza could have easily just overwritten that Bible and gone, well, let's go with this reading. But he didn't, because that was an edition. And it's like, well, we can't just change the Bible text without, you know, getting people involved with that and having a certain amount of authority to do that. But that's why the King James was done. And if you notice, Theodore Beza, a French-Swiss guy, he did the French Geneva Bible. In the French Geneva Bible, he has Eterne there. So it's quite interesting. And so who did things is very important, and the weight that these people had. Beza had so much weight in this generation of scholars that it's like, you know, like in the scientific community, someone like Albert Einstein would be considered top-notch scholarship. That's like Theodore Beza. But when you look at the King James translators, you're looking at a whole class of people like that. And so you can't just override their decisions when clearly they didn't slavishly just follow Beza. There were places where they had made amendments according to, you know, Beza would have talked about things in his footnotes, and many scholars talking about those things in those days. And they went through and they amended about 20 places, enough to warrant the King James Version being called its own edition of the Textus Receptus.
Other places where Beza's New Testament is exactly the same as the New Testament we even have today. Even and many other places where it was the same throughout the 1600s and is different now because of the influence of more, let's say, more emphasis on the older text. Nevertheless, what about the Ethiopic? Did the Ethiopic support Beza's reading? That's important. So what about...
Okay, so look at this. Nevertheless, is Beza's reading, whether or not it deserves the title Textus Receptus. So he's saying that Beza's reading doesn't even deserve the title of Textus Receptus. It wasn't received. So to me, that's ridiculous. I mean, like, it was received. I mean, okay, what was the biggest Bible translation effort in those days? It was the King James translation. Who were the scholars working on it? They were the best scholars in Europe at the time. And what did they accept? The reading. So was it received? Yes. And the English people have received it for the last 400 years. I'm still reading that Bible. Many people, we're still arguing about that Bible. We're not arguing about the bishops, are we? Or about later Bibles that came, the Mills Bible, or, Mills and Boone Bible, or whatever you want to call it. We're not arguing about those. We're arguing about the King James and the readings in that, because the scholarship was very much superior to previous efforts and any effort that's come afterwards. And so they accepted the reading, and so you've also got to accept that the King James carries that reading, and it's accepted by people. People write songs about it. People preach on it. People talk about it. People say it's the expanded name of Jehovah. It's very clear. And so he's got nevertheless. So I might actually just read through what he's got here. So let's go to TurretinFan. And we'll just go down here. Okay, so here's the Ethiopic stuff. So this is the picture I've got in my book with someone else reading in the 1565 edition. So he was marking this up for his 1582 edition. So this is all familiar. We see all this. So he's building a case here. Oh, the Bishop's Bible doesn't have it. Well, that's before Beza. 1599, well, that's a reprinting of the 1560 with different notes. The notes of Beza there. But if you actually read through the notes of Beza, I'm pretty sure in my book, which I'll just get up here, in my book, I do go through the notes of Beza and clearly talk about it. So let's just type in 6.5 into my email. This is how I get to my my book here. For some reason, I don't even have it on my computer. It's on my email. Okay, so here's the printed edition, and yeah, if we go down to Beza, Haya Hava, gone through all those issues. Okay. I am that I am. So I wonder if I've gone through the commentaries. London Polyglot. Okay, I'm pretty sure I do. Okay, I do go through the commentaries, but I'm just not sure exactly where that is. But I'll find it. Okay, trade declaration. Sorry about this. Elijah Hutter. I better look in the index. I don't even have this book. It's sort of sad that I don't. I guess I wrote it, and then I was so exhausted just going through all this stuff because people were sort of begging me to expound more on stuff, and it was like, and I do enjoy it, but it's quite exhausting. It's a lot of work. Commentaries about the trade declaration, page 24. Okay, so let's go to page. It's definitely not the 24. The same page that I've got. Jusinius, I think I went through this. I did too. Perhaps I should just search for Adam. Yeah. Commentaries concerning 2.4, not 24. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I've got Beza's footnotes here. I think it's the last one, actually. Barnes, John Gill, Theodore Beza himself. Okay, so the 15, so we've already gone through these. So Revelation 1:4 and 1:8, he states, that is, God the Father, eternal, immortal, immutable, those whose unchangeableness St. John declareth by form of speech which is undeclined. For there is no incongruity in this place of where necessity the words must be attempted unto the mysteries, not the mysteries corrupted or impaired by the word. Revelation 1:4, by these three times is, was, and shall be is signified by the word Jehovah, which is the proper name of God. In 1:8, it has a confirmation of the salutation, a foregoing, taken from the words of God himself, in which he avoucheth his operation in every single creature, the immutable eternity that is in himself, and his omnipotence in all things, and concludeth in the unity of his own essence, that trinity of persons which was before spoken of. And then in 1:8, I am he before whom there is nothing, yea, by whom everything that is made was made and shall remain, though all they should perish. So he's obviously doing what many other people do, and he also does this in his Annotationis. He goes to 1:4 and 1:8. So when TurretinFan is saying, well, he doesn't say anything in Revelation 16:5, well, in the previous Patriarchic declarations he does. So he does say it. So in the Geneva Bible 1599, it's sort of like, well, he makes no mention of the issue in his notes. Well, he does. It's just that you've got to look in other places. So let's just open this up and just see actually what it says here. The third angel proclaiming the justice of God, which went before the angel of the waters. So he's just talking about, he's not talking about a textual issue. He's just talking about the commentary of what's actually happening there. So the Elves of the Printers, so as I mentioned before, the 1524 edition didn't have it, but then it has it in the 1633. And 1633 is seen as the main Elizabeth text, okay? But then we have other later editions, which are basically the 1624 edition. And so it's printed Ozios, Ozios, Ozios. So then we have 1641. Okay, so that must be Elzevir's editions. Okay, so then we have Scrivener. So obviously Scrivener is going to follow the King James, and he's also following as close as possible the text of Theodore Beza. Walton Polyglot, they only just had, they didn't have any variation. They just had Stephanus's text, the 1551 text. So Bishop Fell, I would suggest that that's what he did as well. I'm not really that familiar with Fell's material, but that's what I would suggest. John Mill did exactly the same. He doesn't have the Greek of Theodore Beza. He has the 1550 text. So there was some reason, apparently it became popular in England to have the 1550 and in Europe to have the text of Theodore Beza. There was like a but that doesn't mean that they've rejected the reading. You know what I mean? So that's what Stephen Boyce was sort of like, well, they've rejected the reading. It's like, well, no, just because there's different printings of that reading, of the earlier reading, it doesn't mean that they've rejected it. Just like the Geneva Bible here, it's not like, well, they're rejecting this reading here. It's like, well, no, they're just printing an older text. So these guys, Walton, printing an older text, 1550. John Mill, 1707, printing an older text. Wetstein, probably doing the same, printing an older text. So things like, we could go on, but the point is fairly straightforward. The New Testament scholars after Beza generally were not persuaded as to this change. So notice this. New Testament textual scholars, so he's not including the King James translators. He's not including people who agree with the King James translators. Piscator, several others. He's not including Tremellius, Janius, like the leaders of Bible translation in that 50, 60 year period. Thus, the only reason for the inclusion of the reading in today's Textus Receptus edition is because it happens to be the Greek text that corresponds to the 1611 King James Version, not because the Reformed churches received this text for a lengthy time. Well, did they receive it or not? I mean, the the scholarship certainly did. And so for whatever reason, when like Walton's polyglot, he has like Codex Alexandrinus, and he's comparing those texts, and I'm not sure exactly why he's going with that Greek text, but the text underlying the King James Version has become the received text, the one that people follow. The readings of that are the ones that people follow, make arguments for. And so, we're looking at pre-internet days, perhaps by the time the 1611 had come around, the 1550 had saturated all the libraries of Europe, and it was just like the standard. So people were just going with that. And so, it's not like, oh, well, they knew of Beza's conjectural emendation at Revelation 16:5 and they're throwing it out and rejecting it. It's like, no, they just are using these older texts. So to say that New Testament's textual scholars after Beza generally were not persuaded to this change, I think that's the same error that Stephen Boyce was making. That's the only reason for the inclusion. It's because it's in the 1611. That said, the Dutch 1537 did adopt the reading, as did numerous English editions. It's actually 1557, I'm pretty sure. Did adopt the reading, as did numerous English editions of the KJV, and translations made from the King James Version, in some cases as by the French, by Jan Frederick Osterwald in 1744, the Spanish Valera 1602. I'm not sure of the basis of the adoption of the Beza KJV reading. Nevertheless, is Beza's reading, whether or not it deserves the title of Textus Receptus, supportive of the Ethiopic version? So he's saying, okay, well, nevertheless, whether it's, adopted or not, is it supported by the Ethiopic version? So I've never really said that Beza supports his reading from the Ethiopic version. My main point was that James White confidently, boldly proclaimed that no one had ever heard of this reading until Theodore Beza made it up in his own mind. So if I find a version with the future reading in it, it's like, well, there you go, it's there. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter whether it's an Ethiopic or a Coptic or a Latin or whatever, it's there. And Beza, Beza didn't make it up in his own mind, obviously, if it's somewhere else. So, I thought I'd bring that up. So it seems like quite a fair bit of this has changed since the video, but maybe not. Let's just continue on.
About the Ethiopic text. Well, not everyone has, all of their time spent focusing on the Ethiopic text. So you could dig into the 1856 Introduction to the Critical Study and Knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, which provides an excellent introduction to the Ethiopic version, sometimes also spelled with an A, and also sometimes called the Abyssinian. In a nutshell, it's believed that Ethiopic version was produced around the middle of the 4th century as the result of evangelistic efforts of Frumentius and Eidesus. Although Horn doesn't mention it, it appears that it was around the same time that script began to be consistent.
So we're looking at Horn. Horn was a defender of the Textus Receptus, and then he turned around and became one of its most ardent enemies, and was coming against the Communionium, saying there's no evidence for it. And so Horn was quite an enemy of the Textus Receptus. So I believe that he had quite a bias. But anyway, let's so I'll let Turretin. I'm trying to sort of get his page up, but I think it's pretty much the same thing. So
written from left to right, after some centuries of being right to left, actually following a period where it was written according to a boustrophedon method, which is from right to left one line, then back right to left, and then back left to right, like an ox plowing a field. Can you imagine how hard that would be to read? Well, apparently our ancestors also didn't care for that, and generally either went left to right or right to left. The Guy's language had a switch, and this is about the same time that vowel vocalization was added, which suggests, it doesn't prove, that the language was kind of dying out, and the need for adding vocalization into the written text is because people weren't able to just read the consonantal text without the vowel pointings. We're calling them vowel pointings because I'm more familiar with Hebrew than I am with Guy's, and Hebrew uses vowel pointings. They're not pointings, they're actually modifications of consonantal characters. The point is that these are added around the middle of the 4th century, around the time of the Christian influence on Ethiopia. And there are some variety of opinions about how the translation of the New Testament came to be. There's some stories that it was actually originally translated from the Arabic, but Horn rejects that idea, and I think Metzger also rejects that idea. There's also some question about when it was translated. Some say as early as the 4th century or even earlier. And some scholars say maybe it was like actually the 5th or 6th century that it was actually translated, and they would connect it with the missionary activity of the 9 saints. There's a link there if you want to read more about the 9 saints. If so, then maybe these Garima gospel manuscripts, which have now been dated with, I think, some kind of carbon dating or something like that, back to that, around that era, these might be some like original translation work, if indeed they are, but they're only the Gospels. I don't remember if I get into it here, but the Gospels are translated earlier and better than some of the rest of the Bible.
So I just thought I'd mention, he's reading from Horn's work and other things. And so this is all fine and good, and so that's why I'm just letting it run.
In Ethiopic. So that's one issue. It's not all done at once, and it's not all done necessarily with the same quality. The first printed edition of any part of the Ethiopic text was a Psalter, printed in 1513. Google Books suggests 1518. I'm not sure which is right, but it's mislabeled as Chaldee at the time. I don't know why it was mislabeled that way. And I think we heard something about that briefly in the material that we read from Nick. But in 1513, there was this Psalter printed. It was Ethiopic, but it was called Chaldee. It isn't Chaldee. It is a Semitic language like Arabic or Hebrew. In any event, that doesn't include Revelation. But in 1548, the New Testament, except for Paul's epistles and Hebrews, were printed in Rome, and the remainder was printed in 1549. Peter the Ethiopian and some others that were working on this project relied on 3 manuscripts, 2 from the 15th century and 1 from the 16th century, and those manuscripts are apparently still available to be reviewed. Horn says that others have described the Roman edition as far from accurate and criticized.
So I'm not sure where that information comes from that they're still available. And so that would be interesting to look at those manuscripts.
That report. But Horn also criticized a report that says that a large part of the book of Acts was filled up with a translation back into Ethiopian from Latin and Greek. And this is actually a little bit of a problem if we're trying to use the Ethiopic for anything that's before the 16th century. We know that this is the state of an Ethiopian text in the 16th century, but it's hard to know much before that. Anyway, we have the original manuscripts that it was built on, so we could actually go to those, and we don't have to rely.
Yeah, so that's all great. One thing that I'm just realizing, I'm just thinking of, when we're reading through this and it's like, okay, Horn is saying this and this other guy is saying that, usually, like say with TurretinFan, like obviously if I was to go through this and accept this information, I would double check it, okay? But I wouldn't say Horn is a liar. You know what I mean? But this is the sort of thing which I see, it's like Theodore Beza, he says he has an ancient manuscript, but that's suspect. It's like, why is it suspect? It's because James White doesn't believe it. So it's suspect. Young Crown says it's suspect. And it's like, why? It's like say, oh, okay, Walton's polyglot has this and he said this, but we would never believe that. You would go, well, why not? And that's the thing with Erasmus. Oh no, we can't believe what Erasmus said in his own annotations. We have to believe scholars like 200, 300, 400 years later. And that's one of the frustrations of going through some of this material. It's like, man, just take these guys on their word first and then come to their conclusions, not just like, well, they're lying. Beza didn't have a manuscript. And just go all the way through. He didn't have a manuscript. I know he said he did, but he didn't. And then right at the end go, well, maybe he did, but we're not sure. It's like, well, why can't you take him at his word and just go, yeah, you had a manuscript? Like, we're reading other things like, okay, this was written here and this was written there, and they had these manuscripts. They're still available. Like, we go, oh, they're still available. Let's check it out. Like, but if it was about Beza, it would be like, well, he said he had manuscripts at the time, but he didn't. It's that, but these guys don't see that as being kooky conspiracy Riplinger stuff. You know what I mean? When they're talking about top-notch scholars in the Reformation and they completely doubt what they claim, it's conspiracy, nutty, Riplinger sort of stuff that they would pull King James onlyists over the coals for going, oh, we don't believe a word that, these guys are saying or whatever. And so I just sort of pointed out that when we're going through this, I'm just relaxed going, yes, yeah, I take that. Yeah, well, okay, if Horn said that, it's probably true. I'm not just like, no, Horn said it, that's it. Throw it out. Oh, Walton's polyglot. No, can't trust him. He probably back-translated the whole thing from a Latin doc. It's just all these strange stories about Erasmus and Beza. And over the years, they've whittled down people's confidence in these reformers, where when you actually have confidence that they're going to do the right thing and they're going to be honest and they're going to do a good job, you don't have all that strange, kooky, sort of cringy, like really bad cringe, like Erasmus rushed to print, or Erasmus made a promise that the Comia Henny would be in there the next edition if someone found it anywhere, or they quickly made a manuscript just to have the comma in it so they could squeeze it in there for Erasmus and all this stuff. How come? These things contradict themselves, because how come in Revelation he's just back translating from the Latin everywhere, but then in the Comia Henny he doesn't back translate from the Latin at all? He has to wait for a Greek manuscript. It's like just so many contradictions and holes. So anyway, I just sort of mentioned that.
Rely on the Roman text. I mean, maybe the scholars have to rely on it because they don't have easy access to these manuscripts. But in theory, at least, they have access to these manuscripts and could refer to them instead of having to rely on this Ethiopic Roman printing. Horn, so it was criticized as being far from accurate. We can check that now. And when it comes to our text, we're not going to see a problem with accuracy, at least not in the sections in terms of accuracy, in terms of representing the Ethiopic text. Now, I question when it says that, when people said it was far from accurate, I wonder if what they meant was that it's too often following Alexandrian readings as opposed to Byzantine readings. If that's what they meant, that's not a problem that Peter the Ethiopian introduced. That's just a problem that the Ethiopian was copied centuries before the Byzantines, the bulk of the Byzantine manuscripts were made, and therefore represents an earlier text. If that's the issue, then calling it inaccurate is just, a distraction. There was in 1652, there was a printing of the Ethiopic text in Walton's Polyglot, which had multiple language texts in there, including Greek, Arabic, Ethiopic. I don't remember all the languages that were included, but multiple languages were included. It was a massive work. And he used the same Roman text, although in some cases he made some typos, essentially, of that text. And he did provide he provided a Latin translation of the Ethiopic. That was the work of, I mentioned it below, but I think his name was Dudley Loftus. And Dudley Loftus is the one who translated. His translation was criticized, but again, I think it's hard to know whether his translation was criticized because people didn't like what it said, or if his translation was criticized on grounds of merit.
Well, Elijah Hixson basically said that Loftus, his translation was poor. He was using Scrivener's own words, and Scrivener was saying that his translation was poor. But see, the whole point about that is, okay, so it might have some places where it's poorly done, but I don't really know. I don't know if Scrivener, because I find holes in a lot of what Scrivener has as well, and I think his annotations at the end of his 190 emendations at the end of his Textus Receptus edition is really poorly done, and so there's lots of holes in his scholarship. So, but at the end of the day, is it wrong in Revelation 16:5? That was the main point I was sort of pointing out to Stephen Boyce and to Elijah Hixson. It's like, okay, well, regardless of what they've done elsewhere, is it wrong here? And it wasn't, because even Stephen Boyce, he went to certain Ethiopic scholarship scholars in the Smithsonian and some other guy, and they basically said it has the future form. So it's like, it does. And so anyway.
All right. It's hard for me to distinguish. 100 years later, Christoph August Bode did his own allegedly improved Latin translation. As we'll see, it's not miles apart from Loftus's translation. It's quite similar. It's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's 100 years later. And then another 70 years later, Platt printed the Gospels from a collation of manuscripts, but the purpose seems to have been just to provide the Ethiopic church or Ethiopian church with this. And he didn't, although he took some notes on his collation, he didn't really provide good critical notes on the text as a whole. And his notes, to the extent we have them, are really limited to the Gospels, I think. So we don't have his notes on Revelation. My own take is that I'm not totally happy with his work. We don't have to rely much on it. I did include it in the survey for completeness. Horn believes that the Ethiopic is a direct translation of the Greek, but that the person who did this couldn't have been a Greek himself because of a lot of translation errors along the way. And I'm not sure how to criticize these translators. There's translators who are doing an overall excellent job, but that they do make mistakes. And I guess the point is, Horn's suggesting that the translator, because he made these mistakes, was working from a Greek text, and that seems like a reasonable conclusion. But that he didn't know Greek very well is like, I think it's demanding a lot. So I'm not sure what to say. I think this incompetent translator is just too unfair. I think there's a lot of challenges in translating between Ge'ez and Greek, and that the translator didn't provide a super literal word-for-word translation of the Greek, but that he overall did a fine job, and that the gospel is not lost or anything like that. But that said, he says that he quotes Platt as saying that the translation has a loose and paraphrastic translation, including so many repetitions, continually representing the same phrase by two different expressions, immediately succeeding one another. And when these are not connected together by the requisite intermediate particles, of course, a great confusion is introduced. So this part, I think Platt makes some good point, which is that it's like, in English, we have the King James Version, which is fairly literal. It's not always literal word for word, but it's fairly literal word for word. And then we have translations that are like at the other extreme, like the Message, where it's just like trying to give you the general idea, inspired by the text, but not really a translation of the text. Then you have things that are towards that end that are quite dynamic. And then there's ones that are less dynamic. I don't know exactly where the NIV, for example, fits on that scale, but the NIV is at times a dynamic equivalent translation, and that tends to be its translation methodology. And it's sometimes criticized as being too dynamic. But in this case, it seems like the Ge'ez translator, or translators, we'll come to that in a second, that they did tend to be a bit paraphrastic and loose in their translation, sometimes even like the, what's that one? The Amplified Bible, where we'll give like 2 or 3 different translations of the same thing and just put them both all together. Sometimes that type of issue crops up in this text, which could create a problem, especially for our purposes for Revelation 16:5, because in our text we have something that's a little bit repetitive already. So you'd be concerned about the possibility of introduced repetition clouding or muddying the waters about original repetition versus introduced repetition. So there's some hints that are made in the 1800s, apparently, that there were multiple versions that were somehow harmonized together because of the idea that maybe this expansion came because the scribe saw 2 different versions and tried to harmonize them into one. Horn dismisses that idea. I tend to dismiss it as well. I think there's good reason, based on the work of Hoffman later, to think that this is not the case. Horn suggests that the translation might be the work of different translators because there's a different quality of translation outside the Gospels. And I tend to agree with that point. That tends to make sense. The Gospels were probably translated first and separately, and then the other may have been translated even by a different person. Horn says it's a mixed text, meaning there's Byzantine readings and Alexandrian readings. And the version is of interest on the question of the long ending of Mark. It's not a point I'm going to get into today, but something for kind of future reference. To the extent people think, oh, the Ethiopic, you got to go with the Ethiopic, it's the best. Well, it's going to have an impact on your view of the long ending of Mark, possibly.
And so that's where James White was like, oh, what else are you going to go with the Ethiopic and all this sort of stuff? I've never said the Ethiopic is the best. I've never said that I would go with all the Ethiopic readings, but James White said that. So this is the problem. James White says things about me and people believe them. People believe like that I'm just like Ethiopic. I'm just like, oh, here we go. I wouldn't care less if it was Codex Beza. If it's got the future reading, it has the future reading. You know what I mean? And it's like, but and so a lot of what TurretinFan is actually doing, and a lot of what Stephen Boyce was actually doing, is responding to what James White said about me in a quick little, oh well, this guy is supporting the Ethiopic reading. Well, why is he supporting the Ethiopic reading? Does that defend the Textus Receptus? Blah blah blah. And it's like, never said any of that. I just said, here's the reading. It's just a fact. Deal with it. You know what I mean? Here's the reading before Beza. You said there was no reading before Beza. Here's one. And then it's like, he's just, oh, he's got to support the Ethiopic then. Is he going to support it in every place? Is he going to, it's like, no. And then so Stephen Boyce does almost like a whole debate about the Ethiopic. And I'm just like, just thinking in my mind, but does it say the future reading? You know what I mean? It's like if I just pointed out, okay, well, this reading is in John Mill's collation of manuscripts. Here it is. This other, this reading, random reading in the Bible, there it is in Mill's thing. Does it mean that I support Mill everywhere? It's just, there it is. It's, and so all of this is basically to come against the Ethiopic, to sort of make it so, and even Elijah Hixson, he did a whole thing. The Ethiopic is untrustworthy in his Revelation 16:5 article, and that was used by Stephen Boyce, and now it's sort of very similar stuff by TurretinFan. The Ethiopics unreliable, you can't really trust it, and this, and so it's just like, I couldn't, like, it's interesting, but it's got nothing to do with what I said. And so let's just rewind what TurretinFan said here. So listen to this.
Something for kind of future reference. To the extent people think, oh, the Ethiopic, you got to go with the Ethiopic, it's the best.
Who's saying, yeah, the Ethiopic, we have to go with the Ethiopic, it's the best? Who's saying that? I never said it. So I would like to know who's saying that. Or is this just something that you've believed that James White, because James White said it. And so this is the problem. James White just goes blah, blah, blah on the dividing line for 10 seconds, and you can spend years mopping up his mess. That's why I dislike the guy. He's just a slanderer. He just says rubbish. He doesn't think before he speaks. He just goes blah, blah, blah. And the damage is huge that he does. And even to the point where I've got TR people going, well, apparently you said this. I was like, I never said that. James White said that. Please don't believe anything that he's saying about me. Don't believe anything. Actually, think the reverse,
As well, it's going to have an impact on your view of the long ending of Mark, possibly.
So I would like to know who is saying the Ethiopic's the best. I don't know anyone.
Horn notes that the use of the Ethiopic version for textual criticism began, or nearly so, with Walton's polyglot, as the Latin translation made that text accessible.
Well, the Ethiopic, King James translators were using the Ethiopic. So they were there were certain scholars who were working on the Ethiopic around the time of the King James translators. So, you would assume that they were doing that before they started their translation, not just like, okay, 1611 was the year they started, that 1604 they started. This still when Beza was alive, so.
And that's right. So there is no reason to think that Beza or other people of his era before Walton's polyglot, so like there was
So I guess one of the main scholars of the King James version. Now I've got it written in my book. I might zoom down to the Ethiopic section. Where are we? Whoops, I'm in the wrong section. I'll go back up to the Ethiopic. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the Ethiopic here. I'm actually trying to find the scholar. Okay. And I'm not saying that Walton's Polyglot Bible didn't perhaps revise the Ethiopic in its day, but I'm pretty sure that there were people who were looking at the Ethiopic beforehand. Now I can't find this information for some reason. Okay, so I think I might even have to go outside of that, but there was a King James Version scholar who was studying the Ethiopic. So
around 100 years from the time that Peter the Ethiopian printed that text until Walton's Polyglot published a Latin translation, it really was largely inaccessible to European scholars, which were almost all of the scholars working on this text.
So it's not so much whether most of the European scholars were aware of the Ethiopian, it's whether that some of them were. And so someone like Tremellius, he was definitely interested in the Syriac, and so the guys who did the Syriac were the same guys who did the Ethiopic Bible. So there would have been a huge interest there. So I'm just King James. Okay, so I guess, so this is one of the problems, finding Ethiopic in some of these searches, where sometimes it's like, well, it can be worded as Geese or Aethiopic. So you got to search for all these terms. And so I'll just continue searching for that.
Text. They didn't know Ethiopic, and therefore the vast majority of them didn't know Ethiopic and couldn't tell you what the text said, because it's not written in Greek characters, it's not written in Latin characters, it's not written in Chaldean characters, it's written in Ge'ez characters, which have some remote resemblance to Greek or Hebrew letters, but it's remote enough that it's not straightforward to just read it. So it's not even straightforward to just sound it out. Horn, writing in 1856, kind of brought us up to the time of Platt. There's a longer history. I've kind of published it here. It begins with Chaim ben David Schwartz from 1490 to 1549, who published that first Psalter, then Tasfa Zion, brother Peter, the Ethiopian, and his companions, other monks named Paul and Bernardus for the Europeans, but Tansa Awald and Za Salase. Those are the, I guess, the Ethiopian names of those three monks. They came together. They could speak Ethiopian, and they could help the printers print the text by making sure that the Ethiopian words were correct, but they didn't know how to typeset. So
yeah, all this would have to be double checked.
Typesetters couldn't speak Ethiopian, and the Ethiopians couldn't speak Latin, or they could speak some Latin, but they couldn't do the composing or typesetting themselves. So they were reliant on two teams of people working together. And I think for what they were trying to do, they did a great job. Then we come along with Brian Walton, 1600 to 1661, who provides this polyglot, including Dudley Loftus of Dublin. So you can see, being an Irish translator and the text not really fitting with the received text at the time, he kind of got criticized for doing a bad translation instead of just instead of these English scholars just saying, well, maybe it's an interesting source. But it is what it is. So Bode, he's another scholar. He provides the translation of the New Testament. He also has he did the Gospel of Matthew first separately, but later on the whole New Testament. Platt comes along. You need the 1800s, his version, which is just in Ethiopic. There's links to all these things on the blog. Dillman comes along in the late 1800s. He's a German Orientalist, and he's known as a commentator, but he actually provided a lot of great contributions to understanding the Ethiopic language, including a grammar, which was then subsequently translated into English in 1907 and is quite useful for our purposes of understanding Ethiopic now. Dillman is still cited by contemporary scholars when they're doing works in Ethiopic. I believe they continue to cite him as one of the sources. His lexicon is there and includes a Latin index if you want to do a reverse search. You want to see how could something be translated into Ethiopic, and this Crestomathia Ethiopica. So subsequent. Okay, so all this is great and interesting and all the rest of it, but as I said at the beginning of the last video, if you can't tie knots, you tie lots. And so this is what I feel like I've made a claim. It's got the future form in it. Does it have it? Tick, yes, it does. So all of this it's interesting. It's sort of like, okay, well, this manuscript has a Comiohanium in it. Does it have it in it? You read it and go, yes, it does. Or you can talk about the manuscript and talk about its provenance and talk about scribes and Byzantine this and that. And it's like that's all great and all interesting and everything, but yes or no, and that's the thing. At the end of the day, it does have the future reading in it. So I've just done a search for a few things. So I'll bring up this site. Now, this is the King James Bible Translators. I'd recommend everyone go here and check this out. This is a great site. Unfortunately, it's run by the Mormons or run by two guys who are basically Mormon type of guys. And so, but there is a lot of really interesting things here. So I wouldn't let that fact that they're Mormons cloud that issue. So listen to Richard Brett.
He began his academic career at Oxford when he became fellow at Lincoln College. In 1595, he became rector at Holy Cross and St. Mary Quentin in 1595 to 1537. As already mentioned, he was famous in his time for his extensive knowledge of ancient languages. He was well versed in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Chaldaic, Arabic, and Ethiopian. One of the King James translators. You know what I mean? And so this is what I find, like, TurretinFan's got this whole list of people. So I see it wasn't until the London Polyglot until 1657 until scholars really became interested in Ethiopic. Okay, what about this guy? And we're saying he had this chair from 1595. I mean, a lot of the time I would go through these and go, okay, who does this guy know? And you just type in like Visa, and okay, he doesn't know Visa, but it says here, and in 1616 he was appointed as one of the original fellows at Chelsea College, London, along with his fellow translators John Overall, Miles Smith, John Spencer, John Boyce, John Layfield, and Francis Burley. So he's a guy who knows Ethiopic really well, known for his ancient languages, and he knows all these guys. You know what I mean? And it's like, that should in itself just go, okay, there's other people who know about the Ethiopic before, you know. So these claims that just come up, that they're just wrong. So okay, so let's have a look here. So I've just searched for King James translators Ethiopic. Let's have a look. No, Quora seems weird to me. Okay, so let's shut that one down, and let's go here. Search for the same. And I've only searched for Ethiopic too. Ethiopian language. Looks like a King James translates to the readers, actually. Okay, that's fine. We'll go to the next one. Let it load up. Okay. Not that interesting. Okay, well, in Bedwell. Not interesting, but okay, it looks like a Muslim website. Okay, King James Version translators. Okay, so that's where I searched. Okay, so Richard Brett. And Richard Brett. Richard Brett was one such translator. He attended Oxford, So Church of Jesus Christ, so that's the same Latter-day Saints. Okay, so let's have a look. It says in Wikipedia that he knew the Ge'ez language. Okay, so Ge. Okay, so he knew the Ethiopic tongues. Okay, so there's not that much on him there. Ethiopic. English scholar, Geese, Ethiopic. Because oftentimes these are just copy and paste of the same stuff, so you're looking for something a little bit different. Looks interesting. Geese, Ethiopic language. Ethiopic. Okay, so Erasmus King James English translators. Okay, so someone has written about that guy there. I might type in Geese. Type in Geese first. It doesn't come up. Now if I type in with the comma. Okay. All right, let's have a look. What do we got? So Wikipedia clearly says that this King James Bible translator, he knew the Geese language. Okay, so he could read the Ethiopic. Okay, so Oxford Academic. This is Gordon Campbell's book. Okay, so apparently it's got the word Ethiopic or Geese here. Geese. Why sometimes it's search and doesn't appear on the page. But anyway, so here, he's here. He pursued his study of Latin, Greek, Aramaic, Arabic, Hebrew, and Geese, Ethiopic tongues. Okay. So there's that one. Okay, so this is the 16 or AV 1611 page. So this must just be, okay, so this is David Sorensen. So he must have written some interesting things about his language. Oh, Richard. Yes, Ethiopian. Rector of Quainton in Buckinghamshire, revered for his piety, was skilled in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Chaldee, Arabic, and Ethiopian, and noted as a most vigilant pastor, a diligent preacher of the word, of God's word, a faithful friend, and a good neighbor. Okay, so this is the church that apparently he was part of. So might have some more information about him. It would be great to get like some written things or something about his studies, but maybe that's him. I'm pretty sure that's him, or David Campbell actually. Anyway, let's search for Richard Pratt. Okay, so let's look up. Find. So it says here, Geese. He was granted a fellowship at Lincoln where he studied Geese. Okay, so that was in 95. And I guess that's him doing restoration work there. Okay. Memoir. Okay, so this. Very interesting. So it looks like that a whole bunch of other people have joined this church, and it's still active and lots of history behind it. So he was there for 45 years as the pastor. Okay, so that's interesting, but yeah, I'm just going through as a cursory look. Portuguese, looking for Ethiopic. Okay. The Learned Press, Oriental Languages, Oxford Press. For the study of Hebrew, he became an essential part of the humanist tradition in England with 2 works. So I wonder who this is. Okay, so this is the history of Oxford University, the Learned Press. So even before William Laud established a professorship of Arabic in the university, he acquired Oriental types from Holland, so that the press collection grew to include Arabic, Syriac, Ethiopic, Coptic, Armenian, and so this is the Oxford University Press. So, okay, it doesn't say when the Ethiopic came there. Okay, so we don't have access to that chapter. It's just a bit of a brief, but it's the history of Oxford University Press, so maybe I can see it on Google Books. Maybe Ethiopic, okay. Ethiopic punches. England and worked for Fell. Ethiopic, Syriac, and Arabic. Ethiopic, Ethiopic, 19th century. Ethiopic, the printer. Okay, so there's quite a lot of interesting things here. I guess you'd have to really get the book. But anyway, we've learned a bit that Richard Brett was an Ethiopic scholar. There you go. Even just a bog standard Wikipedia article says he knew geese. So there you go. Okay, I'll leave that one open. Let's continue.
Currently, Marcel Cohen, late 1800s to late 1900s, was an expert in Semitic languages, especially Ethiopic, and he also includes some discussion of the Ethiopic language, and he's important partly because he's the one who trained or mentored at least Wolf Leslau, who is an expert in the Ethiopian language and author of many books, including a comparative dictionary of Ge'ez and a concise dictionary of Ge'ez, both of which are excellent resources and are definitely used still today. He brings us up through near the end of the 20th century. There's also some other great scholars that have done work in this field, including Monica Devens, who has a concordance of the Psalms in the Ethiopic version. It's very valuable. There's this Traces Lexicon project, a concordance of the Ethiopian Bible, which is updated last in 2021. Daniel de Caussin has done a corpus of Geese words found in the book of Enoch, Henoch as it's put here, but I think it's just the same thing as Enoch. And they, although this is not formally a concordance like Monica Devon's work, it serves a similar purpose, and it's also quite informative in terms of helping to better understand the Geese language. There's a Bible in Geese. There's the Geese Bible as well, a different website. And Kurt Nickham has an interesting article called Apocalypse Now, the Ethiopic, which I think Nick will get a chuckle out of the Apocalypse Now, I'm not sure, but I think so. And then the subtitle is the Ethiopic version of Revelation 50 years after Hoffman. I may have typoed something here. But in any event, he's updating the research on the book of Revelation 50 years from Hoffman. So 2017 is 50 years from 1967. There's also an Ethiopic grammar by Mercer from 1920, which is also helpful. And then there's additional details that you can find in Bruce Metzger's, the early versions of the New Testament, their origin, transmission, and limitations. From my own standpoint, the Ethiopic text poses a number of challenges. First, the Geese character the character set itself is problematic. It may have it is probably connected to the Paleo-Canaanite script, same as Greek is, and lots of other languages are. And it probably is derived from ancient South Arabian, not Arabic, but ancient South Arabian.
So I'm just looking through some more. We find here one translator, Richard Brett, a graduate from Oxford, is said to have been a scholar in Latin, Greek, Chaldee, Arabic, Hebrew, and Ethiopic tongues. So I'm searching for the Ethiopic. The Chaldee means Aramaic, used in parts of the Old Testament, and Ethiopic as in the Semitic liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Oops, that is not, that's just a pop-up. Sorry about that. Let's get rid of that. I'll probably have to delete that from my feed or else it'll come up. I better check the time on that. 1:37. Okay, so we'll go to YouTube, find that, delete that little bit, and how annoying. Anyway, you're going through searching for this sort of stuff and rubbish comes up. And the sad thing is too, you search on the Bible nowadays and you get these stupid like I'm getting ads on Quora. Okay, that's fine. But you're searching for like King James Version, and you're getting all these pop-ups, and it's just ridiculous. Anyway, to the Latin Vulgate. Okay, so I'm searching for Ethiopic, but it doesn't come up on Quora. It must be like an old thread. Okay, that's a bad gateway. That was actually a dictionary. I might see if I can find that. Copy that. Find that in a search. Taste search. Okay. Out of Nichols, more stupid pop-ups, but I'm pretty sure this has the whole book in it. So let's look at. Okay, Ethiopic. So it says here, Miles Smith, yeah, Richard Brett, and then it says that the Ethiopic tongues So he's the main Ethiopic guy. Okay. Okay, so I can't find that anymore. So I think we've sort of exhausted Google for the moment. So now we're getting stupid pop-ups come up. So let's avoid that.
And there's many similar names and sounds of the letters. There's something like a Dalet and a Gimel and so forth. And there's use of vowel markings of the consonants, these consonantal changes to indicate vowels. If you know Hebrew and Greek, you could probably learn Ethiopic, but not, it's not like it's highly similar and you can just learn a few different words and you're good to go. It is a different, separate language. I think Rosetta Stone put Amharic as a category 3 language, I think for English speakers out of 4. So not the most difficult, but also not, far from being the easiest. And Amharic is a modern language. Ge'ez is an ancient language that's related to Amharic. That's why I mentioned Amharic. Another challenge is some of the resources that are out there will transliterate the Ge'ez words into Roman letters, which is helpful if you're trying to sound out the words and you don't read Ge'ez at all. And people do this with Greek as well. A lot of times you'll see people put the Greek word and then they'll put the English transliteration right afterwards. A lot of people like this. It's great for introductory works or reference works that for people who don't speak the language. But it can be really hard to understand when you're trying to read through different reference books that are using, some are using the Ge'ez characters, some are not. Some are just using the English, the phonetically equivalent English. And there's a couple of different phonetizations, I think that's the right word, for Ge'ez. And I don't know how much that's standardized, but I've seen a couple of different ways that people have done it. That just makes it more complicated to process. Ge'ez, which is partly why probably Beza didn't know it and wouldn't have had a Ge'ez Bible next to him as a reference source because he didn't speak it.
Tie knots, tie lots. So, if you're tying a rope, you see this with kids, you throw them a rope on the car and you're trying to tie something down and they'll wrap it around and tie it around. But if you know how to tie a knot, you can just do one little loop and it's tight. It's good. And this is the thing. Does it have the future reading? Yes, it does. And so did Theodore Beza know about this? Well, according to, if you were to just go through TurretinFan's material here, it's not until the London Polyglot where people become interested in the Ge'ez Ethiopian language. But just on a cursory look, one of the King James translators was an expert in Ethiopic. According to, I showed dozens of different places, like even Oxford Academic Press, they're saying this. It's not just King James only websites or whatever. They're showing this, and so it goes against this narrative. So basically, he's created a whole narrative that it's not until 1657 that people started getting interested in Arabic. Sorry, in Ethiopic, and so that's just wrong. I've just disproven that with just a quick Google search. And we've also seen that it's one of the King James translators. So if we were to go earlier than that and look at other people, which I guess I'll do, I'll start going through that, we'll probably find way more information. And so anyway, so you can't make your conclusions according to what TurretinFan's just said because it's obviously wrong. So, okay, so let's continue.
And because it would have served him exactly the same as a Chinese Bible would have served him, which is to say, not at all. He wouldn't be benefited by having it, not even a little bit, because he couldn't sound out the letters, much less.
How does he know this? So this is the thing. It's like, I understand if he's like, okay, we're not sure whether Beza knew the language or not. I mean, so one of the King James translators knew Ethiopic. He was a scholar in Ethiopic. So, and he could have been a contemporary with Beza. And Beza died in 1605. So this guy, he was like a rector or whatever of this parish in 1595, expert in languages. And half the time Beza was in contact with these scholars. So I guess the Ethiopic was just like, on the shelf there, and it just had a big cross on it and said, do not read, like until open this package in 1657 with the Walton's polyglot. Don't look at it before that, because scholars in the future, that's their story. So you don't want to let the facts get in the way of the good story. And the thing is, I've just done a cursory look, and we've found this scholar, and it's like, how do you know about Beza? The thing is, there's plenty about Beza that I don't know. I know quite a lot about Beza, but there's plenty I don't know. And especially what manuscripts he had, what languages he was involved with. And because he, like when I'm saying that he was contemporary with Tremellius and Jenius, they worked together. So someone who knows Chaldee, someone who's done a Bible in Syriac, the Semitic languages. I mean, even Lancelot Andrews, he knew, like, let's look at the languages he knew. Christian History Institute, Master of Languages. Okay, so he spoke 15 modern languages and 6 ancient languages. Okay. Maybe I'll type in Lancelot Andrews Ethiopic. Didn't think of doing that. Okay, maybe I'll go Ethiopic. Now, there's nothing telling me that he knew Ethiopic here, but I wouldn't put it past. If I found a thing that said he does know Ethiopic, it wouldn't shock me. Okay, let's look at this. He's saying that they knew Ethiopic. French, Spanish, Italian, etc. This is after they have already translated the Hebrew and Greek, but also the relevant Syrian, Ethiopic, and other versions. So this guy's claiming the King James translators were translating the Syriac, the Ethiopic, and other versions. Because it just, why would they see, okay, Syriac version is important and not the Ethiopic? Why is the Ethiopic all of a sudden just like nothing? Just an aberration. It's like a little pimple. But these other, like you would never say, oh, they didn't. Like if I said, oh, they checked the Syriac version, it'd be like, yeah, probably. And even Beza in his annotations, he's like, yeah, the Syriac says this and says that. But it's like, okay, Ethiopic. So no, that goes in favor of Nick Sayers' thing. So we've got to try and get rid of the Ethiopic completely from that part of history. No one was interested in the Ethiopic. No, nothing to see here. No, move on. It's like, okay, the more I search, the more I find little snippets of information that people were very interested in these type of things. Okay, find a grave. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's open it in a new tab, Hebrew Scholarship. Okay. Okay, so I don't know why that one said that it had some sort of. Lancelot Andrews is one of the most eloquent and munificent prelates that. Okay, Ethiopic version of scripture. Thomas Andrews. Okay. So it's talking a lot about languages here. We're just going through this. John Mee, 1652 to 1557. That would be the polyglot guys who no doubt revised that whole learning. Okay. Maybe Thomas Andrews has got some interesting. Anyway, I'm probably boring you guys to tears. So, but what, like, see, Lancelot Andrews, a brilliant scholar and all the rest of it. I don't see that Theodore Beza had much of a difference between someone like Lancelot Andrews. Now, Lancelot Andrews knew a lot of languages, but why is it so strange to think that Beza could have known Ethiopic? If I said, okay, he could have known Italian. Okay, he doesn't mention it, but it's like, that he could have, Okay, so let's look at this one. This looks like a Trinitarian Bible Society article, actually. The Learned Men, so I might mention something about the Ethiopic here. I don't think it's searchable. Anyway, it's an interesting article. So let's get back to TurretinFan. But I think you get the point. Why is it always just? Why is it so certain that he never knew of the Ethiopic? It's just absolutely certain. Can he say either way? We're not sure. Like, did he know about the Italian, or did he know about the Spanish Bible of 1569? Well, he doesn't mention it, but did he probably know of it? Yeah. Well, so why doesn't he know of this Ethiopic version? And why is it to him like Chinese letters? When other people were able to decipher these things, other people who went to Oxford were able to decipher these things. So were other scholars able to do this before the 1611 guy, translator guy, or he just started it, So the thing is, you can't answer them yet. I can't answer them yet because we don't know. But the thing is, we've got to study these things and look into them. And you can't make definitive conclusions about hundreds of years of scholarship just on, this basic sort of look at the Ge'ez language,
Words. That said, there are some nice things. The Ge'ez characters are now in the Unicode set. So you can copy and paste them. You can do digital searching on them and so forth. It's quite handy. I think it's probably thanks to the fact that modern Amharic is spoken in Ethiopia and outside Ethiopia, but primarily spoken in Ethiopia, and therefore there was a push to include those characters, including the Ge'ez characters, in the Unicode set, and they're done separately, not as diacritical modifications of a base character. So if let's say a Kaf character can have 7 different vowel forms, there's actually 7 different Unicode characters, not just one, and 7 ways to modify the one. So let's see. In some ways, this is a lot like the issues that arise with Greek or Hebrew. In fact, I should add, the language itself, to perform declension or conjugation, and some scholars would say you don't really decline the words in Ge'ez, but anyway, there's prefixes that are used for some things and suffixes used for other things, including adding on conjunctions and prepositions, and the use of those conjunctions and prepositions is used to understand the language better.
Okay, so I'm still searching on the side, so I guess I'm sort of vaguing out a little bit because TurretinFan's talking about the deep things of the Ge'ez language. So to this, add the complexity of language itself, which uses both prefixes and suffixes to perform declension, if one can call it that, and conjugation, but also to add conjunctions and prepositions. Thus, parsing language can be difficult. Like I said, if you can't tie knots, tie lots. Just what has this got to do with Revelation 16:5? In some ways, one might observe that I'm not saying that it's wrong for TurretinFan to be going through all this, but what I'm saying is it's like the conclusion is equals, yeah, Nick was right. It's there. It's in the future form. So, I mean, I have no, like if someone was to say to me, how much of Ethiopic does TurretinFan know? I would say pretty much 0, even though he's written this stuff, it's like, I don't even think he really knows what this means. Now, my friends are from Eritrea, so they speak fluent Ethiopic. Now, I'm trying to contact them to get them to read the text for me and go through it. And so they go to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church at times, and I went and visited them in the Ethiopic church, and it was quite interesting. There was a testimony about a lady who was persecuted. She was kept in a container ship for like a few years. It was like their jails are basically container ships, which is pretty psycho. But anyway, so we're going into the intricacies of how the words are constructed, but at the end of the day, I mean, even English words have declension by having words added to it. Unknowable. It's we add words to make it something that's not. It's a negation of the word, and so. Anyway, let's continue.
There's some of these are characteristics of languages like Greek or Hebrew, but it has its own rules, it has its own forms, and so forth. And it's not easy for someone like myself to just kind of pick it up. I'm really thankful for scholars who do pick it up and use it. I think an example was that I was recently working on was Stephen. Oh my! I can't remember his family name. Stephen Shoemaker seemed to, if I recall correctly, learned Ge'ez and translated from Ge'ez as part of his work in connection with the bodily assumption of Mary materials that are out there. Some of them are written in Ge'ez, and evidently he provided translations that he himself did. That's really impressive to me. It's not easy to pick up languages, at least not for me. By way of an example, the second person singular masculine is indicated by the suffix kaf, sometimes transliterated as ka or ka, as opposed to a second person singular feminine, which is with a kaf modified so that it says ki or ki instead of ka or ka. The difference between those is the difference between a kaf character with no vowel modification versus one with this lower right corner. It's the 5th out of 7 forms that a kaf can take. And I have on the screen here, you can't see it very well here, but if you go to the blog, I promise you can make it bigger and you can see it a little better. But you can see the difference is the kaf that the cursor is pointing at. Yeah, the cursor is pointing at here is the masculine. And this very similar one is the feminine. It just has this extra little, I don't know what to call it, but this vowel marker in the bottom right corner. And that tells you that it's a ki, not a ka sound, a different vowel going with the same consonant. Interestingly, Gi's numbers are not Arabic numerals. They're not Gizic numerals, if that's a term. They are actually Greek numbers, possibly borrowed directly from Greek or via Coptic. But my point here is not to teach everybody Giz. I've been meaning to use this pun, and I apologize, but I can't resist at least using it once. I'm not a Giz whiz, but
that's a full dad joke there.
And this point is not to make any of you that. I would say that in terms of background, the current go-to text is Hoffman's text, which is part of this, well, it's 1967, so it's over 50 years old now. I think that's the most recent critical text of Revelation, and it's based on 26 manuscripts. Now there's over 100 known manuscripts. Some of those are even older than those used by Hoffman. But keep in mind that that's not, in some cases, it's not very old. These aren't competitive with New Testament Greek ancient manuscripts. Like the most ancient Greek New Testament manuscripts are much older, we think, than the vast majority of all Greek manuscripts, and also almost all of the Greek manuscripts of Revelation are not that old. They're maybe like 13th century, 14th century, something like that, but not super old. And you can go and you can read, he has some discussion of his sources. Also, this Apocalypse Now article, I think, describes it a bit more. There may be some 10th century manuscripts or something like that out there. There's been some redating of some of the manuscripts since Hoffman. So, yes, I'm not a Giz whiz, or that's the joke. Metzger, I'm not, but yeah, just trying to make a pun here to keep the mood going. Metzger in 1977 notes that John Mill, in his 1707, identified some Ethiopic readings in which the Latin translation of the Ethiopic found in Walton's polyglot agrees with Codex Alexandrinus, and in a few places sided with Ethiopic either alone or with very few other witnesses. However, at Revelation 16:5, Mill has, as you can see, Hosius, here we go, there's the pointer, or that's not the pointer, here we go, here's the pointer. Hosius is here in his text, meaning that he went with the Greek, what I call the Greek original.
He just had the 1551 text of Stephanus, that's it. So it's not really that his choice was to go with against the Revelation 16:5 text. He was just using the what, I would say the bog standard text was of that day, which was a popular text, and so that's what they went with. So it's a reprint of a 1550 text. It's not his own edition. So to go, oh, well, he went with this edition, so he rejected this reading, that reading. No, he's just showing what the 1550 was the most popular text in Europe. And so some of these scholars just went with that text when they were doing compiling things. So,
although he does have this Chi, which I would disagree with. I think I would disagree with. But anyway, he has the Chi and the Hohosius, not Hosomenos. And you'll notice that I included all his critical notes at this place, and he doesn't cite the Ethiopic for this text. He doesn't cite it for the Somenos. Just trying to see, yeah, he doesn't cite it at all for verse 5 for any of the readings or anything like that. But I will note that in the previous verse, you'll see that he does cite it in one place, and this is how he cites it: AE, this AE ligature, THIOP period, Ethiop, and it's cited here. It's also cited here. So you can see he is regularly making use of it. He didn't make use of it for finding a different reading in Revelation 16:5.
Well, 5 here is talking about Kyrie Kaiho Ozios. DEEST is usually means it's deleted or omitted. The Kaiho in Alexandrinus, in those number 2, the Vulgate. Omits the Chi. And so, yeah, interesting.
As one shouldn't, and I'll get into.
Okay, so I'll just check my website. I think I've got something on that. Revelation 16:5. Okay. Mill. Sure, I had John Mill. Maybe I've. Anyway, ready to search. I was sure I had an article on John Mill. I guess I've put some material in the book, but it's not really about the Ethiopic in John Mill. I think it's just mentioning in the 1707. Oh, I never mentioned that. Mill. Oh, don't even mention John Mill. Maybe 1707. Oops. Nope, I didn't even mention John Mill. That's very interesting. Okay.
Into why one shouldn't in a bit. So I've included the notes just to be thorough there, but also for your interest if you're interested in such things. Metzger notes that.
So what we're looking at is Hoskia is saying that it has the future reading in the Ethiopic there. But John Mill is not saying that. But it just depends. So I'm going to go to TurretinFan's page because he has the link here. Okay. Okay, so Revelation 16:5. Hoosios. Verse 3, verse 9, verse 6. Okay, verse 5. 15:3. Verse 7. 1, 4, 8, 4, 8, 11, 17. Okay. And then we have down here 5 Ozios in Alexandrinus. Okay. So the thing is, I don't think he's not even mentioning Isomenos here. If it was Isomenos and then he's looking for that particular reading, it doesn't look like he's even entertaining that type of reading here. Mostly because, like my whole book is about, this is a Norma Sacra. And the issue that Theodore Beza had the manuscript, it doesn't mean that 100 years later or 130 years later that this guy had a manuscript. So he compiled, I think he did, what was it, a compilation of like 30 manuscripts, or he collated 30 manuscripts, I think, against each other. But he also looked at these other things. But also, I guess it depends on what Ethiopic he's looking at. Which one? Because is he looking just at the London polyglot? Is that what he's looking at? Or, is he looking at a certain other Ethiopic? Because that's where I would look, so which Arabic Bible, which Ethiopic Bible, which Syriac Bible, which, because by this time, there's other editions that are out. People saying, well, what about this manuscript? And they're publishing it and printing it, and it's like, well, that's different. And so that's where you'd have to go to Mill. You'd have to look at the beginning and look at exactly which Ethiopic manuscript he's looking at. Is that the one on the Ethiopic that's in Walton's polyglot? It might be. Is he obligated to talk about readings? Because I'm sure the Ethiopic reading has, certain additional words, additional verses, additional things in it. Are they all mentioned, or is it just, usually when it's trying to back up, the Greek says this, so it's deleted in the Ethiopic, but it's in this other one, etc. Now, if he is seeing this as an aberration, Ozios, which most text critics would say, then he's not even going to talk about Isomenos, and he doesn't here. So, so it says Latin Vulgate, Seidel, the Chi is omitted in. Is that the Complutensian, Aretheus, Peter 2:3, M. Hunt. Okay. Very interesting. I've looked at a lot of Mill's material. It's usually seen by, say, people like Bart Ehrman as, a brilliant Bible and one that turned the corner for textual criticism. But at the end of the day, he believed that the Vaticanus was a back translation from a Latin document. He didn't see much value in it at all. He is mentioning the Ethiopic quite frequently. But that just has to be examined and thought about. So I don't know what this Seidel is with these symbols. It's quite frequent. There. It'd be an interesting document to go through, actually. Okay, so let's continue.
that Hosker found 50 places in Paul's epistles, not even counting Hebrews, where the Ethiopic is nearly the only witness that agrees with P46. The idea being that potentially the Ethiopic Paul's epistles might be a representative of quite an early text of Revelation, which would mean that we should be considering the Ethiopic as representing an early Greek manuscript tradition, and therefore maybe give it a little bit more weight than we might otherwise be inclined to do, based on the fact that some of these manuscripts are not that old by comparison to the Greek manuscripts. There's some discussion here that Metzger says, Hoffman says, that the Apocalypse, the Revelation, was translated between 550 and 650, in other words, mid-6th century to mid-7th century, by a different translator than the Gospels. And he also says that there's a lot of contamination in the text, and that includes this word, which I had not known. This word is Schlimm Verbesserungen. I'm sure I butchered the word. Schlimmverbesserungen. Schlimmverbesserungen, which means bad improvement. So apparently, people tried to improve the text. They did a poor job of it, and there's been some bad corrections of the text over the centuries, including changes that came from the Coptic and the Arabic. There's Arabic changes to the text that appear in their textual tradition after Peter the Ethiopian's printed text, and therefore obviously don't affect Peter the Ethiopian's text, but just kind of for interest, they continued to do handwritten copies in Ethiopia after Peter the Ethiopian printed his text. It didn't immediately take over there. Within Metzger's book, Hoffman himself offers a chapter section. This is in a 1977 book. Hoffman offers a section on limitations of the Ethiopic in representing Greek. This begins at page 240. I'm sorry for laughing. I saw this comment. Bad corrections like the cleanup job after Pope 66. They actually did a good job of cleaning up after him, I think, but his corrections were bad corrections. Let's see. So the limitations that Hoffman in Metzger's book describes are phonetics. In other words, although there's a lot of phonetic range in Ge'ez, it doesn't always line up well with Greek, so transliteration of words is not something you can really count on, that it's going to tell you what the Greek original was. And that is what it is. We would have that same problem in English. In fact, that's something that Scrivener seemed to have run into when he was trying to figure out what was the original Greek text for the King James Version. Sometimes the phonetic similarity test may have misled Scrivener. In other words, some of the English words may be more phonetically similar to one Greek version than to another Greek version, but actually the King James translators were probably just following a traditional English spelling.
TurretinFan's been listening to my material, because I'm the only one really saying that.
Of those words are traditional English transliteration, not necessarily following one Greek over the other. So, and that doesn't affect our particular verse because there's no transliteration going on in Revelation 16:5 or the other parallel texts, at least not in the parts that were of interest to us. However, the other ones are morphology, syntax, or morphology and syntax. I should edit this at some point. Hopefully I'll remember. But morphology is a bigger issue. Under morphology, there's numerous issues, including Ethiopic having only masculine and feminine, but not neuter. So like some other languages, Greek has masculine, neuter, and feminine, but Ethiopic only has masculine and feminine. So some details of which Greek word were used will get lost in translation, sort of necessarily. There are ways to express things, but that depends on the skill of the translator and the intent to try to preserve that kind of detail for us later. which the translator is not always up for. And as we said, some of these translations seem a little paraphrastic. Well, another reason is that Ethiopic lacks both definite and indefinite articles. On this point, we can criticize Ethiopic for that, but that's the same problem that Latin has as well. There's no an or the in Latin. In Russian, there's lots of languages that don't use articles. English has articles. We don't use them just the same way as Greek does, though. So even that, there's not a one-to-one correspondence necessarily. Also, and maybe even a bigger concern to us, are verb forms. Ethiopic is capable of expressing only a very limited measure of the information that's contained in a Greek verb form. And this is critical because our variant relates to a verb in the Greek text, and the difference between two different Greek verbs.
It's very frustrating because I know that TurretinFan, he's not an expert in Greek or Latin or Ge'ez or any of these languages, but it's like he's trying desperately to find something that he can relate to Revelation 16:5 and say, see, it's wrong because someone here said that you can't match up the verbs properly. And it's like, but most of the time when you talk to people, they're like, well, you can never translate any of these languages from one language to another accurately. And so, people are like, well, you can never translate Greek into English. And I remember one time, some people I know, they were working for the EU and they were translating Luxembourgish. Okay. So Luxembourgish, they were translating this from the English, and also everything was translated into German as well. And so they showed me how they did it, and at the time they were using a lot of Google Translate as well. So, it was like Google Translate would be a hub for like the CIA. Just people are just like, what does this mean? And they throw, sensitive documents into Google Translate, and these guys are like, wow, and they delete it and they put it into printed form and all the rest of it. And it's like, well, Google saw it. But anyway, another story. But these guys, I said to them, so do you lose anything in translation? Is there anything you can't really translate? Because that's like, Christianity 101. Rule number 52, you can never translate the Bible properly, word for word sort of thing. And they were like, no, we can translate everything. And they're talking about financial things. They're talking about percentages of taxation. They're talking about, the environmental code of different languages. They're talking about, warfare and limitations of nuclear weapons in certain countries. But they're able to get that across. And one of the things is, next time you buy a set of headphones or something and you get them from China or something like that, and you get this piece of paper and you unfold it and it becomes huge. And it's in Arabic, it's in Chinese, it's in Hindi, it's in Arabic, Urdu, and it's in all these languages. How can they get all that correct? And sometimes it can be not just a set of headphones, but it can be something like a medical device, and they explain everything perfectly in each language. And it's like, how do they do that? How do they? How does a food product that contains mustard seeds that's imported from the Middle East, how does that get to your kitchen with it saying this contains this, and it has a perfect translation of what they're saying? And then it has it in Chinese, it has it in Japanese, and this can be very important. There's some people who eat that could die from an allergy, with those type of seeds. And so how come everyone else seems to be translating these things properly, but Bible translators can never do it properly? And so this is the thing. When I hear scholars say this, I'm just like, okay. And so apparently, or that you can't translate the Ethiopic properly either. And it's like, I'm just sort of rolling my eyes on the inside going, we're dealing with this type of silliness again, but sometimes there might be certain things that you can't translate properly, but it's like you've got to really be fluent in the language to know how this affects the language. You can't just go, see, they're saying that it doesn't match up, so in our text it doesn't match up. It's like you can't do that. It's that, like the people who were telling me about their translation into Luxembourgish were fluent. I said, how come you guys can translate from English into Luxembourgish and you don't have a problem with it? And they're like, well, because we're fluent in both languages. Case closed. That's it. People who don't know languages, like when you're translating from Urdu to you got Hindi, which is very similar. You got Punjabi. Those type of things, translating that into English, people who know these languages fluently can do that. And so my wife can speak 4 languages, and so she does this all the time. She'll be talking Punjabi 1 minute, she'll be talking Urdu the next, she'll be speaking Hindi, and then speaking English, and so explaining to me what she just said, and talking to different people, talking to people who speak Punjabi, and then saying the same thing in Urdu, and then ringing up a friend and telling him in Indian Punjabi, and then talking to another friend in Hindi, and then explaining to me all those things in English and doing it perfectly. How come she can do that, but a Bible translator can't? It's just, anyway.
Well, I say the basis correction is to correct it to be a Greek verb, whereas the other proposal is a Greek adjective, I believe. So let's see. Yes, Algo note says the fiasco of his attempt is recognized by all serious students of history. Quite right. But they did actually do a good cleanup of his mess up, I think. They pulled back nearly everything. I don't know if any of the manuscripts of that survived. If they did, they'd probably be extremely valuable for historical reasons. I don't know what extremely valuable constitutes in that field, but something. Anyway, coming back to the Ethiopic. So there's much less information in Ethiopic verbs than in Greek verb forms. And more specifically, when it comes to the question of the time of the verb, the Ethiopic verb has no reference to time. It indicates only whether an action is regarded as perfect or complete or incomplete, imperfect. And this is a big problem for Nick Sayer's underlying theory, which is that there's 3 times mentioned here in the text, past, present, and future.
So notice, TurretinFan, this is why I keep saying this is a straw man argument. I've never said this with the Ethiopic. I never said it, and this I've gone over it over and over it with Stephen Boyce. I never said that this has the whole entire Triadic Declaration in it. Have I? Please tell me where I've ever said that. And now in our debate with Stephen Boyce, he accused me of that, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry if I've ever done that," because I was just apologizing if I'd done that. So I went through all of my material. It took me days and days and days, and I realized I had never done that anywhere in my writings or in whatever I've spoken about. And so I went back to him and said, "Actually, Stephen, I've never said that." And he said, "No, you admitted it in the debate." And I said, "No, I apologize if I'd done that. Not I wasn't admitting guilt." And he said, he just basically didn't want to hear it. He's like, "No, you said it. That's it. Case closed." It was like, but I've never said that. And so here, TurretinFan, listen to what he just said. And this is why I get really tired of this type of stuff, because it's like rehashing over and over and over and over. It's just like, what have I said here? It's the future form, which equals isomonos, or shall be. Okay. It's very clear. That's all I've said. James White says a whole bunch of stuff, and these guys run with all this other stuff, and it's like, chasing rabbit trails, and it's like there's 50 rabbits gone off, and I've answered every single one of them. And it's like, okay, bring it all back. What did I originally say? The Ethiopic has the future form. Does it or not?
Complete or incomplete, imperfect. And this is a big problem for Nick Sayers' underlying theory, which is that there's 3 times mentioned here in the text, past, present, and future. When Ethiopic doesn't map well in its times to Greek times. And we're going to see how this plays out in more detail as we go on. But ultimately, the problem is, we'll see this in attempts at translating from Ge'ez to Latin, where we run into this problem. Latin has similar flexibility to Greek, not as much maybe, but similar to Greek, but Ethiopic doesn't. So we have this like kind of almost back translation from Ge'ez to Latin. Unfortunately, it would be kind of handy to just have back translation to Greek, but that's not how it was done generally. But anyway, let's continue on here. So here's just a snippet of the discussion of time. It has no reference to time, just whether that's complete or incomplete. And the verb to be has its own issues. In fact, there's a separate section just on the verb to be, and even its use as a copula is just passed over. There's something similar, I think, in Russian, maybe. If you're going, you could just jump over the verb to be if you're using it in this copulative sense. But also that creates problems when you're trying to back translate. Did the Greek have a copula form of the verb to be there or not? Is it just skipped over? And there's various ways this is handled. He gives some examples from the Gospels, all from Matthew, I think. And there's also another problem, which is that there are no participles in Ethiopic that align with Greek, except for the perfect passive participle. But the perfect passive participle in Greek isn't one of the ones that we're interested in, but we are interested in whether there are 2 or 3 participles in the underlying Greek text for Revelation 16:5, and Ethiopic's not going to be able to capture that detail as such. So we're going to have to get to it in an indirect way. Dillman himself, in Crichton's translation, explains the issue of the time of the verbs. So you can read about that there if you're interested. Actually, it goes on. I posted all here. Some of the formatting is a little bit amok because of the mobile formatting of this text. You can read on your own time. I'm not going to read all those pages. Likewise, issues associated with these are the 2 verbs that have to do with being in Ethiopic. One of them is actually used in Revelation 16:5, but again, this is dealing with their copula usage, and we don't have to, or connecting words usage, same idea. Well, we don't have to get into it much here, but the point is this there are additional issues specifically with this verb in Ethiopic. Nickum in 2017 describes the substantial work that's been done since Hoffman, and he states that Hoffman's verdict that none of the extant witnesses examined preserves unadulterated the text of the initial translation, the so-called Aksumite Bible, still holds true, and that Arabic influence is present in every manuscript. So what Nickum is saying here, not Nick Sayers, but Nickum in his Apocalypse Now article, he's saying, so Aksumite relates to the ancient capital of Ethiopia, which was Aksum, I want to say Aksuma. Anyway, the Aksumite Bible, or the original Ge'ez Bible, this one, it's hard to get back to it because it's been corrupted by introduction of readings from Arabic. And unfortunately, Arabic is wildly different than the Greek at Revelation 16:5. It has something like eternal instead of literally translating at all. So
which would point to nomen sacrum.
We don't know to what extent the Arabic has had an influence on this particular issue. It's really hard to unring that particular bell. But what about the Ethiopic text that we do have? We can wring our hands all we want about, wouldn't it be lovely if we had an uncorrupted Ethiopic text? But since we don't, let's just deal with the text we have. There are 5 passages of interest to us. They're of interest to us because they are related by Nick. They're related by others who see the connection between the one who is and was being mentioned in each of these places, either in that form or who was and is. But either way, in all 5 of these places, that aspect is mentioned, who is and was. And let's see. So, given all these challenges about participles, times, and specifically in I, we'll just consider all these passages together. So what I did in this article, and I'm just going to breeze through most of this, what I've done in the article, if you're interested to read it in more detail, please feel free. I've gone through the sources I could find, starting with the 1548 Peter the Ethiopian Bible, and I've just snipped out the sections that are relevant. So this is Revelation 1:4, here's Revelation 1:8, 4:8, 11:17, 16:5, then Walton's Polyglot at the same places, then Platt in 1830, his edition in various places, and then finally Hoffman's 1967 in the same places. And the summary, I'll give you the summary of these. I also compared the Bible in Ge'ez and the concordance of the Ethiopian Bible, which are some electronic resources that are out there. And after doing these comparisons, I just kind of looked at each verse, what are the relevant portions of the text, and I just compared the readings. They're not all the same. Even what I thought might be the same initially, the Bible in Ge'ez and the concordance of the Ethiopian Bible, I thought those might be the same, but there's actually a small difference at Revelation 16:5. I don't think I'll bore everyone with a detailed description of all these things, except to point out that the differences at Revelation 1:4 are small. are small among these versions. There's one prefix in one word that's omitted by Walton's, and the 1548. There's the reason for that is probably because it's an expansive reading which has this Ge'ez word, whereas the Platt and Hoffman texts don't have that word at all. And therefore this prefix, which is included in the first word, is not included in the second word in Walton's Polyglot, whereas it is, both of these prefixes are included together in the one word that's found in Platt and Hoffman. I don't know, this might be boring for people if I get too much into the weeds. But again, there's not huge differences at 1:8, except that at 1:8, and I don't know why, but presumably to harmonize with 1:4, this word has been included at 1:8 by the 2 online electronic resources, but it's not found in the printed texts. Revelation 4:8, here are they all, in one place, they all were the same, at least in the relevant portion of the text. But note that the relevant phrase that's of interest here has now shrunk to just 2 words in Ge'ez, whereas previously there's 3 words in Ge'ez, and before that, again, 3 words in Ge'ez, 3 words at 1:4 and 1:8, down to 2 in 4:8, and then again 2 in 11:17. And the only real difference here is that Walton's seems to have not properly vocalized this particular letter. You'll see there's a slight difference from this one. It's really small. And it might even be my eyesight that's the issue, not Walton. It's hard for me to read Walton's text. The font is very small. The scan is not perfect quality. And, it is what it is. And then there's as well, there's this issue of this, whether or not to add this second person singular masculine here, which they do add at Revelation 11:17, and Platt adds, but the I call it a prefix. It should really be a suffix. I probably should correct that as well. So things to correct. We'll have to go back over this and make those corrections. Then when we come to Revelation 16:5, you'll notice I've excerpted a longer section. It includes those same two words we were talking about. If you'll notice, there's a small difference because of this character, but that's that second person masculine singular suffix that I was talking about before. These are the largely the same words. This has another issue, but if you look at like Walton's here or Hoffman's here, the only difference is this suffix. And this is the one place where there was a difference between the Bible in Geese and the CEB. So let's see. So what about Latin? So we talked about the Geese, but not all of us speak Geese. I'm one of those non-Geese speakers. But Latin is a lot more familiar. Lots more people speak Latin. And there are three that I know of, Latin translations of Geese texts that are out there that are professionally done. Loftus is one, Bode is another, Hoffman is the third, and they are all different. So there are similarities, there's differences. I've summarized them here. Loftus 1657, provide his Latin translation of the relevant text with snippets so you can confirm and check. Same thing with Bode, and same thing with Hoffman. So I won't belabor that point, but you'll notice with Hoffman that there's a lot of notes, but that's because it's a critical edition. So in summary, if you see Revelation 1:4, qui est et erit, qui venit et venturus est, you'll notice it's a little bit different from what Bode has, which is a little bit different from what Hoffman has. Hoffman has these parenthetical versions added, which kind of give more of the connotation, which I think is a good point, but not necessarily a literal reading. Bode is supposed to be an improved translation as compared to Loftus, but Bode is inconsistent. The Geese is the same at Revelation 1:4 and 8, and yet his translation of fuit here and est, or fuit in parentheses here, is different. Et erit here, but erit goes into parentheses here, and erat becomes the main text. And then in down in 4:8, he just switched. There's no more parentheses. Qui is put in as a helper word, but ultimately there's a lot of confusion because his translation seems to be translating the same Geese words in different ways in different places, and it doesn't seem to have a good justification for it. It's an interesting read, but ultimately, I'm not won over by his points. But what he's highlighting, what his translation highlights is, notice this fuit is different from est. Est is it is, fuit is it was, erit is it will be.
And boom. All of that, like I was saying, if you don't know how to tie knots, you tie lots. Come down to these three translations, and they all have et eris. Et eris, et eris, which is the future form of equivalent to esomenos, equivalent to futeris, which means shall be. Shall be. Okay. So here we have some English forms of it. Will be. And so my question, does it have the future form? Yes. So all this other stuff, what is it? It's interesting, but it's fluff. It's just a long way of getting around just focusing on that one thing. Does it have the future form? But James White says that the Ethiopic doesn't have the future form. Is James White wrong? Yes. Even TurretinFan's own research proves that. Case closed. Book shut. There we go. Yeah, sure, we can look at all this, and I've done a lot of this homework myself, looking at all this stuff on my website, and but at the end of the day, going to these other guys, it's just proven the future form is in other people are recognizing that as well. So
I've done more here for those who are interested. You can go through. Everhard, by the way, he has here as which is and was or will be. He's all over the place in terms of his translation. I'm not saying that it makes him wrong, but I'm just saying that there's a lack of consistency, and that's frustrating to someone who's trying to get an exact translation across. Hoffman is more expansive. He puts lots of these further explanations. By the way, this incorruptus, I don't know how in the world he gets incorruptus instead of rectus here, but it is what it is. That's what he put. So you can check it out as well. I have snippets if you're interested to read those details. So I ended up creating.
Just go back. Notice it has here, Loftus has Domine, Lord. Bode has Domine, Lord. Hoffman has Domine, Lord. It all has the Lord reading, doesn't it? So what Stephen Boyce said about it, it doesn't have the Lord reading, it has God reading there. Well, these three guys think it has Lord. How I wish that I got a $1 for every minute that I've spent on the internet trying to talking about these things, and it's just like just all I've done is state the obvious. It's like I don't know why people just can't go to this and go, yeah, actually Nick's right. Case closed. Move on.
But it is what it is. That's what he put. So you can check it out as well. I have snippets if you're interested to read those details. So I ended up creating my own, and I don't claim to be a professional translator, but I ended up creating my own translation to summarize the 1548 text versus the critical text, meaning Hoffman's text, not meaning the critical lesson on 28 or something like that. And I put the English on one side and the Geese on the right. And you can see like the main difference is this, which comes is in the 1548, but not in the critical text. So it's an added word. And I went with which is and will be, not easily, but based on the predominance of the way it was translated, both by different translators and in different places. But it seems to be the best way to render it, something that's not easy to render back into English from Geese. So I went with, I did the best I could, but that is what it is. So,
and in all honesty, like with TurretinFan doing this is the best way to learn a language, is to actually just start translating. Like I know a lot of people go, well, I've got to learn everything first, then I've got to translate. Now just start translating, because you'll make a mistake and you'll correct it. You'll go back to your original work and go, oh, that was silly. But you learn so much in translating. And it's a very important thing to just start translating. If you want to be a translator, start to actually do the work of translating, and you'll learn 3 times as quick as just learning the languages to the point of absolute fluency, and then do translation. You actually learn the language a lot quicker.
What about 1.8? Well, 1.8 is the same. Both the critical text and 1548 are the same. So I just made one translation. And I went, again, because I said that I thought this is the best translation of these words in 1.4. The same words should be translated the same way in a later place, and so I've translated them. The same is true about Revelation 4:8 and Revelation 11:17. Notice that, by the way, in Revelation 4:8, although the Greek that we have has a form of to come, there isn't one here in Revelation 4:8 in the Ethiopic. And there isn't one at 11:17, like the critical text, which doesn't have it at 11:17. But unlike the 4:8 and 11:17, these are places where the Ethiopic contradicts the received text in terms of having this form of the verb to come here.
More so, probably, it's followed a nomen sacrum, or something like that. Like at the end of the day, this concept. Well, I've always, in my study, because I've looked at this for quite a while. These two forms have the past, the present, and the future form in it, because this is the translation of most of these other guys. And so if we just go back to some of these translations, the Venturus S is the future form. So I can't see how TurretinFan is saying that. Okay, so we've got the future form there. Okay, so 4:8, and sorry, I'm looking at the wrong, and I did say it's a nomen sacrum where I shouldn't have said that for these two. I guess I'm just getting a bit tired. So just forget what I said in the last 1 minute. But Revelation 4:8, Revelation 11:17. Okay, so in the Ethiopic, these are not, they don't have the future form. But that seems strange, because the other one does have the future form, but it has the same Greek words. And so, but that's for more future study. Noticing et eris doesn't seem to pop up here anyway, which is the reading that I pointed out. Will be, doesn't say et eris anyway. Anyway, I just sort of find this a long way around not saying that it says shall be or will be.
When we turn to 16.5, the difference is small between the two texts. It's just whether or not to put the word them here at the end, and that's just reflected in this single character, which is a suffix that would provide the them. The 1548 includes it. The critical doesn't include it, but that's the difference. And thus the just you are, O Lord, and right, who are and will be, thus you have judged them. That's the English translation of the Guise text, as best I can give it, based on the help of the Latin translations that came before, and all the Guise references and so forth I could find. So this is my best attempt to render the relevant portion of Revelation 16:5. There is more before just is the angel of the waters says comes before this. This is part of a quotation.
So we've still got 20 minutes of this to go. Now it's nearly 1 o'clock in the morning here in Australia, and I've got to be somewhere at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'm only going to get about 5 hours sleep. So I might pull a pin on this, and we'll continue on from the 1:14:46 mark. But as you can see, I've sort of had to go through all this. The vast majority of it is, like, I'm not saying it's worthless. I'm just saying, like, for our purposes, I guess, because it's intermingled with is this Nick Sayers' idea, and then it's in his book. Well, what have I said about it? Is it the future form? Yes, it is. There you go. But what I see is TurretinFan, he's trying to get around that. He's trying to, change the fact that it is the future form. And I guess, there is a lot of stuff here, which is great. He's typed these things out in 1548. He's got a critical edition there. He's got a whole bunch of things, which, I'll put all this into my website as well. And, I've already put a lot of information into my website, into the Revelation 16:5 section on the Ethiopic. So that's the Lord section. But when we look down here, you can see I've gone through the Walton's polyglot. I've typed in a lot of these things, Eris, you will be, and so you can see the difference here. Revelation 16:5, also the I am, the Zahalo word is used here, and it's also used here, so the I am, because some of them are saying it's only got the past and the present, or the present and the past. Anyway, so I've got the Walton's polyglot with the Lord there, with the words which would equal the one which was and is to come, and then the final triadic declaration here, the one who is and shall be. Okay, so quite interesting. But as TurretinFan was saying, it can be quite frustrating looking at Latin translations of it, because at times these are not absolutely verbatim. So here we have Walton's polyglot here. We have the Ethiopic reading translated into Latin, but sometimes it's not exactly how you would want it to be. So that can be quite frustrating. But here we have Hoskia. He's like, okay, does it have et eris? And he's like, the Ethiopic has et eris. Okay. So that's the Ethiopic reading. Justus est domine et rectus qui fuisti et eris. And that's the Ethiopic. So the Beatus of Libana has futurus s, which is equivalent to et eris. And so anyway, that's like, to me, it's just, I'm just stating a fact. Hosky has stated a fact. Do I have to like everything else in the Ethiopic? No. Do I have to know everything about the Ethiopic? No. Do I have to, can I just point out that it's got the future reading? Yes, absolutely. So Herman Hoskia, he has this translation from the Ethiopic from Latin, just art thou and righteous, that was and will be. So am I claiming there's a triadic declaration there? TurretinFan's, the triadic declaration, some people say the Ethiopic is the best and all this. It's like, no, I'm just saying it's got the future form. That's it. So anyway, I think I'll leave it there. So we'll go to the 1 hour and 14 minute mark there, and we'll do an extra, 25 minutes or so next time. Okay, so God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, this has been quite long-winded and a little bit boring, in a sense where I'm just basically playing TurretinFan's material and offering a comment every 10 minutes or so. But there's, I do have to go through everything, because there's so many little comments in between that deal with me and deal with the topic. But at the end of the day, it was just sort of, it's a whole wall of information. And like I've said from the beginning, if you can't tie knots, you tie lots. Just explaining lots, and like I could talk about the Greek language and how the Greek language can't be translated properly, and how the Greek language, this Greek language, that, but is that 100% relevant to where we're at in an argument that I'm having? So I could talk all day about how the English language has strange idioms and weird words and strange spelling and all that. But does that change the fact that Rhinoceros unicornus is a rhino? It's not a mythical creature, does that change the fact, so on some of the other debates we've had, like to bring up all this whole wall of information would have just been considered a bit of a waste of time. But I understand the Ethiopic is not something familiar, so you sort of have to do all this homework to get to that point. And I'm glad that he's put it all on his website, but it's, for the listener, it's not really that exciting to go through all this. And even TurretinFan was like, going through my material here, you guys might be bored to death, but you're listening to me critique his material that he admitted was probably going to be really boring. So this is double boring. But it's just, this is the type of thing that I have to go through to just get to the end where he admits, yes, it has the future reading, just like Hoskia said. Okay. So he's going to try and get around that, I guess, but let's see what happens. So anyway, guys, thanks for joining us. Hopefully I'll be able to do some more exciting videos, and we'll get to some more exciting parts of this Revelation 16:5 series. But the thing is, too, TurretinFan hasn't, it's not like he really wants to go through all this. He is critiquing my work, and so I've said it's in the Ethiopic. He's doing his homework. Kudos to him for doing all this, and that's great. It would be great to have an Ethiopic scholar jump into the arena of text criticism and start talking about how it relates. Maybe someone will rise up and start becoming an Ethiopic scholar. That would be fantastic. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should, get the 1548 and start doing it like a parallel, and look at all these editions and type it out on my website. And I wish I had the time to do all that, but unfortunately, some of us have to work and pay the bills and all the rest of it. And so thus why I have to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning in 5 hours. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you another time.